He didn't limp. He didn't cry. He just held his arms stiff, like if he moved it wrong, something would snap. And still, they told him to keep playing. The coach barked at the other boys to toughen up. Thomas Parker Bowles muttered something about legacy. And Prince George? He kept his mouth shut because someone told him that bravery meant silence. But the guard saw it, the angle of the arm, the way George used his shoulder to drink water, the way he looked down instead of speaking up. And when the field emptied, when the shouting stopped, it wasn't the coach or Thomas who stayed behind. It was the guard who walked George to the medical wing and stood silent as the X-ray lit up with a clean, deep break. Not soreness, not bruising, fractured through the bone. And when Thomas still said, "He'll play through it," the guard didn't argue. He took the scan, walked past every order he was given, and placed it wordlessly in Prince William's hands. William looked once, then again. Then he stood up and walked straight toward the men who made his son believe that pain was part of the job. He didn't shout. He didn't wait. He handed the report to the palace legal office and called the police himself, because this wasn't rugby anymore. This was reckless endangerment, and someone was going to jail. So before we show you the moment a royal guard risked everything to protect the boy who said nothing, tell us in the comments, would you have intervened if the future king was told to keep quiet? Hit subscribe and turn on the bell icon. Because this time, the guard didn't wait for orders. He gave one. The early afternoon sun cast a long shadow across the south lawn of the royal grounds. It was the kind of quiet day the guard preferred. Nothing unexpected, no high-clearance visitors, no ceremonial movement, just the routine, predictable, structured. Sergeant Dorian Vance moved with practiced rhythm, his boots crunching softly along the gravel pathway that curved behind the east hedgerow. His radio was silent. No updates. No alerts. He was halfway through a perimeter sweep. Standard protocol every afternoon, especially when young royals were scheduled to be outdoors. Vance didn't mind the monotony. In fact, he welcomed it. He'd done private security, military rotations, diplomatic overlays, and in every one of those roles, peace was the best possible shift. He passed a garden steward trimming the edges of a rose bed and gave a faint nod. Why acknowledged with a respectful glance. A slow breeze shifted the branches above, scattering light across the lawn like falling coins. The only sound apart from the birds and his own footfall was a far-off whistle, sharp, clipped, professional. Then another. He paused, turned slightly and heard the distant rise of adolescent voices. Not laughter, not panic either, something in between. It was coming from the lower training field, just over the shallow ridge near the west stables. Vance changed course, calmly, without urgency, just enough to observe without inserting himself. From the top of the hill, the field rolled out like a clean green canvas. A group of boys, perhaps a dozen, were running tight practice formations, short sprints, tackling drills, pair exercises. At the centre of it all stood a man in a fitted navy tracksuit, ear whistle slung around his neck, clipboard under one arm, barking instructions. He was lean, wiry, with the air of a man who coached not for fun, but to win. A few metres off to the side stood Thomas Parker Bowles, dressed in country formal wear. Slightly crumpled blazer, collar open, sunglasses tucked into one hand. He wasn't coaching, but he was very much present. Every now and then, he leaned toward the coach and muttered something. The coach nodded back, sometimes adjusting his instruction style immediately afterward. Vance recognised both faces, of course. The coach had been cleared for temporary appointment, brought in to prepare Prince George and a few of his peers for an upcoming charity rugby match between palace and military youth. A largely ceremonial affair, but you wouldn't have known that from the tone on the field. The guards' eyes swept the formation. George was among them, toward the rear of a sprint line, trailing slightly behind a taller boy in front of him. He wasn't smiling, that wasn't unusual, but something else caught Vance's eye. George's left arm was tight to his side, held just slightly off angle, not visibly injured, not enough for alarm, but not relaxed. During the next drill, a shuffle pass, George received the ball and winced as he redirected it, then quickly masked the expression and jogged back into line. The coach didn't pause, just shouted, "Faster rotation next time," and blew the whistle again. Vance narrowed his eyes. Another set. George ran. Took a light shove from a teammate during the tackle dummy. Stumbled. Caught himself with one arm. Again. Nothing overt. But the movement of the left shoulder lagged. His gait shifted slightly on the return jog, favouring the right side. "Get your head in it," the coach snapped. Thomas chuckled. "Boys'll never learn if you coddle them," he said, loud enough for most of the field to hear. The boys didn't respond. Vance took a breath. He made no move toward the field. This wasn't his arena, not unless security protocol was breached. But he made a quiet mental note. Something about the setup didn't sit right. The level of pressure, the way the prince carried his frame, and especially the lack of any staff medics nearby, despite visible exertion in heat. He adjusted his position slightly, stepping in closer behind a nearby tree line, not to interfere, just to observe. And then, in the next drill, George went down. Not hard, not dramatically, but the tackle was clumsy. Another boy collided with his side. And he twisted as he hit the grass. The coach's whistle cut through the air. "Up, up, lads! George, don't hesitate next time." George rose quickly, brushing his hands off, but the left hand remained limp for a second longer than the right. He flexed it once, twice, then shook it out. Vance's brow creased. The guard didn't move forward, but now the note he'd made in his head had shifted tone. It was no longer something to keep an eye on. It was the first real indicator that something was off. And sometimes, in places like this, off was the only warning you ever got. The whistle blew again, this time sharper, less instruction, more correction. The coach paced the length of the field, voice booming. "Line up! No excuses. Next round I want contact." George rejoined the line, jaw clenched. His arm hung just slightly lower than the other boys, his hand opening and closing behind his back like he was testing something. Vance clocked it from the tree line. Still, he didn't move. Observation was often the most valuable tool. The next drill was full-speed contact. George didn't avoid it, but he hesitated just enough. When another boy lunged too early, the tackle came down awkward. George turned to protect himself. His shoulder took the weight, and his knee buckled slightly. He didn't cry out, just hit the ground, rolled once, and came up standing. The coach's voice followed instantly. "You hold that ball like it's glass, George, and we lose. Again." Thomas didn't say anything this time, but he didn't need to. His arms were folded. His stare didn't break. The silent signal was enough. George returned to line, face flushed. The sun caught the sweat on his brow, but more than that, it caught the way he held his left elbow tightly against his body. Not cradled, just locked. Water break was called 10 minutes later. The boys scattered toward the shaded bench and plastic crates full of bottles. George peeled away slower than the rest. His steps weren't heavy, but they weren't light either. Vance noticed him veer slightly off course, toward the perimeter, where the hedges curved and gave some cover. George didn't say anything at first, just walked until the edge of the field dropped out of earshot. Then he looked up. "Sergeant?" Vance turned his head slightly, keeping his posture formal. "Yes, Your Highness?" George's voice wasn't shaking, but it was quiet. "Is it supposed to hurt like this?" Vance didn't reply immediately. He crouched down slowly, so he was at eye level without towering. "Tell me where it hurts." George hesitated, then pointed to the upper forearm just below the elbow. "Here," he said, "and a bit further up, when I lift it or twist." "Did something happen today?" "Earlier, in drills. It bent funny." George looked down. "I told the coach, but he said don't make it a thing. Match is important." "Has it hurt like this before?" George shook his head. "Not like this. It stings, but not like burning. Just like wrong." Vance resisted the instinct to reach for the arm then and there. Instead, he looked the boy in the eye. "Did you fall on it?" "No, got knocked. Someone came in late." He paused. "Coach said that's how we learn." Vance stood slowly, keeping the exchange invisible to the field. "Did you tell anyone else?" George shrugged. "It's just a game." That phrase caught Vance off guard, not because it was wrong, but because it didn't sound like George. Not the George he'd seen sprinting in the courtyard 2 days ago, laughing as he outpaced his cousin. Not the George who corrected posture during a photo lineup without needing to be reminded that George didn't limp in his own body. Vance glanced over the field again. The coach was calling them back to formation. Thomas was nodding, gesturing for them to move faster. The guard looked down at George, voice neutral. "Let's not make a fuss then. But if it still hurts after this set, come back to me. No questions asked." George nodded once, then turned and jogged back, shoulders squared, jaw set. Vance didn't move from that spot for the next 20 minutes. And when George went down again, this time not even attempting to use the arm to brace his fall, Vance didn't look away. He didn't intervene yet, but he knew. The game wasn't just physical anymore. It had become something else entirely. Practice was winding down. The boys had run through scrimmage rotations, line pushes, and 2-on-1 defence drills. The sun had begun to slip, just enough for the shadows to lengthen across the field. George was slower now, noticeably. His hair stuck to his forehead and sweat pooled under his chin. But it was the arm that spoke louder than anything else. By the end of the set, he wasn't just avoiding contact. He was using only his right hand, even to pick up the water bottle, gripping it against his chest like it was glass. Vance stepped forward. He didn't march, didn't raise his voice, just walked purposefully. Across the edge of the field, making eye contact with no one but the coach. "May I have a word?" The coach turned. For a second he squinted like he didn't recognize the uniform, then remembered himself. "Of course," he said, but the tone barely concealed annoyance. They stepped a few feet to the side, just enough for privacy, but still within range of Thomas, who was watching with arms folded, brows twitching at the interruption. "The prince may have sustained an injury," Vance said plainly. "He's limiting use of his left arm, has expressed pain. I recommend a medical pause." The coach chuckled. "It's rugby. They all express pain. Builds grit." Vance didn't react. "I'm not discussing threshold. I'm stating observation." "Observation from behind a bush," the coach countered. "You're not his physio, I am. And I'm telling you, he's fine." Just hesitant. "Can't have that on the pitch tomorrow." Vance kept his voice low. Protocol indicates that injuries, especially with contact sports involving minors, require a formal medical check if concern is raised. That's not discretionary. Now Thomas was walking over casually, like he'd just happened to overhear. "Something the matter, Sergeant?" "His Highness may have suffered an impact injury to the arm. I've recommended a precautionary evaluation." Thomas smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I've seen worse sprains in prep school. He's not yelping, is he?" "No," Vance replied, "but he is protecting the limb and has said it hurts." "Kids say everything hurts when they're tired," the coach had. "He needs to learn push through." "Oh, that's the whole point of training at this level." Vance's jaw tightened just once, but he remained neutral. "Push through and permanent damage aren't synonymous. I'm requesting 10 minutes with the medical staff." Thomas tilted his head. "You're requesting?" Vance nodded once. "As the senior protection officer on site, yes." The pause that followed was long enough to register a power shift. Then Thomas stepped in closer. "Let me put this plainly. You're here to guard the family, not run training camp. George plays tomorrow. One day of soreness doesn't cancel weeks of prep. And if we start pulling him out every time he bumps an elbow, we might as well wrap him in cotton wool and hand the match to the Navy side." The coach folded his arms again. "With all due respect, Sergeant, your job is lines and safety. And mine's the field." Vance didn't flinch. He looked at both men and then toward the field, where George was standing at the end of the line, subtly favouring his left again, his posture more slouched than ever. "I'll step back," Vance said quietly, "but I won't be far." Thomas gave a tight smile. "Appreciated." The moment fractured with a nod, and Vance turned, walking back toward the sidelines. Not in defeat, but in calibration. He didn't disengage. He observed harder, because something in the coach's smirk and Thomas's narrowed glance made it clear they weren't just ignoring protocol, they were betting no one would enforce it. The final whistle blew just after 5. The boys let their shoulders drop as the coach dismissed them. Water bottles clattered, boots dragged, and for a moment and the energy shifted to something more like relief than routine. Vance didn't move from his position at the tree line. He watched. George lingered at the edge of the field, not talking with the others. The other boys were laughing about who'd been tackled hardest. George, by contrast, was bent over slightly, trying to unzip his rugby top with one hand, the right hand. The left arm didn't lift at all now. He braced the sleeve against his hip and tried to shrug it off without bending the elbow. His face twisted once, only once, and then he gave up, sitting on the grass. He rubbed at the joint like it might loosen up on its own. Vance moved. He crossed the field slowly, letting his presence be known without drawing attention. A few of the boys stepped aside instinctively. One of them whispered something about the guards coming over, but no one followed. George looked up just as Vance reached him. "I can't get it off," he admitted. "Let me." The guard crouched and gently lifted the jersey hem from the bottom, motioning for George to help with the opposite arm. As they worked the fabric off, George hissed once, low and sharp. Vance got a better look now. The swelling wasn't massive, but it was there, just below the elbow, subtle heat under the skin, not red, but firm to the touch. "Can you twist your wrist?" Vance asked. George tried. Didn't even manage a quarter turn before he stopped himself, biting his lower lip. "All right," Vance said calmly. "We're going to the wing." George blinked. "Now?" Vance nodded once. "Now?" From across the field, the coach was shouting again. "Oi, George! You're not dismissed. Gear stays with the kit box." Thomas followed the voice with a bark of his own. "Where are you taking him?" Vance didn't raise his voice. "To the medical wing." "Did I approve that?" the coach demanded, stepping forward. Vance stopped, standing straight with George at his side. "He's in pain. His arm is immobile. This falls under immediate assessment." Thomas was already closing the distance. "This is a bruise, Sergeant, and you're going to make it a scandal because the lad didn't like being tackled." George said nothing, but his shoulders hunched slightly behind the guard's frame. Vance didn't change tone. "If it's a bruise, it'll be treated as such. But we'll confirm that with a doctor, not opinion." Thomas's eyes narrowed. "You're not a parent." "I'm a guard," Vance replied. "That means I'm responsible for his safety when no one else is acting on it." The coach scoffed. "We'll see what the office has to say about this." "By all means," Vance said. Then he turned without waiting for permission, hand resting gently on George's uninjured shoulder as they began walking toward the palace wing. He didn't check if Thomas followed. He didn't need to, because the line had been crossed, and Vance had made the call. The medical wing didn't look like much from the outside, just a low structure attached to the east corridor of the palace, used for everything from vaccinations to private recovery. But inside, it was efficient, sealed and still. As they entered, the atmosphere shifted. No whistles, no shouting, no eyes pressing for performance, just the soft hum of machines and the click of the guards' boots against tile. And George followed quietly. He didn't ask questions, but the way he clutched his wrist, not as a child playing hurt, but as someone waiting for an answer, was telling. The receptionist stood when she recognized the uniform. "Is His Highness injured?" "Yes," Vance replied. "Upper arm, possibly elbow, impact during field training, requesting immediate examination." The doctor was summoned immediately, an older man. Silver hair but brisk steps. He greeted George with a smile and a gentle tone. "Let's take a look then, young man." "Don't worry, we'll go slow." George nodded, lips pressed tight. Vance stayed back, positioning himself discreetly in the corner of the room as the exam began, but he didn't leave. And when the doctor looked to George and asked, "Would you like someone to stay with you?" the boy didn't even glance up before replying, "Yes, or him." The guard inclined his head. They started with questions. How it happened, where it hurt, when the pain had started. George answered all of it softly, clearly, without theatrics. Then the physical exam began. The doctor palpated the forearm gently. When he reached the swelling, George winced, then shook his head as if to apologize for the reaction. The elbow wouldn't rotate fully. The wrist could flex, but the bicep tensed in a way that suggested guarding. "This is recent," the doctor murmured. "Not old bruising, not strain." He looked at the nurse. Let's order imaging. George glanced up. X-ray? Exactly, the doctor said, with a reassuring nod. Just a few minutes, then we'll know for sure. The room emptied, except for the nurse and technician, who guided George behind the partition. Vance watched through the small observation window, still and silent. The wait wasn't long, but it felt like it. When the scans printed, the technician handed them to the doctor wordlessly. Vance could see his expression shift as he held them up to the light. Then came the verdict. The doctor re-entered the room with the X-rays in hand and laid them gently on the table between them. One image was highlighted with a marker, just below the joint, near the radial head. A clean break, he said, transverse fracture of the proximal radius, not hairline. George's eyes widened slightly. That means... It means, the doctor said gently. You were very brave to keep going like that, but it also means no more impact on that arm. At all. Not for 6 weeks, minimum. Vance stepped forward slightly. Could it have worsened if he'd kept playing? The doctor nodded. Absolutely. Could have shifted. Displacement. Long-term ligament damage. At this age, we don't take chances. George didn't say anything, but his entire frame softened, like someone who had just been told their fear was real. You knew something was wrong, the doctor said kindly. Did anyone look at it earlier? George hesitated. I told the coach, but he said it was fine, that I'd get over it. The doctor's face remained neutral. Well, I'm glad you came here. He turned to Vance and handed over the full medical report. This should go to whoever needs to see it. There's no ambiguity. Thank you, Vance said. Shall we put a temporary cast on now, or wait for your family to join you? George looked at the guard, uncertain. Vance answered gently. Let's get the cast started. Your father will want to know you're resting already. George nodded. As the nurse prepared the materials, the doctor stood beside Vance for a moment, lowering his voice. This wasn't a fall, he said. The pattern's consistent with direct collision. No self-brace. And the way the bruising's setting, it happened hours ago, not recently. Vance nodded. That fits what I saw. The doctor's eyes sharpened. Who kept him from treatment? Vance didn't answer directly. He didn't need to, because he was already holding the answer in his hands, in black and white, and he knew exactly where to take it. By the time Vance stepped back onto the training field, the sun was dipping, casting long amber lines across the... Most of the boys had left, their kit bags slung over their shoulders, to voices fading down the gravel path toward the residential wing. But the coach remained, pacing, phone in hand, and Thomas Parker Bowles stood nearby, arms crossed tightly over his chest, his expression unreadable. The moment the guard came into view, both turned toward him. Did you get your little scare confirmed? The coach asked, sarcasm bleeding through. Vance didn't rise to it. He held out the sealed folder. Official medical report. Transverse fracture. Doctor recommends full arm immobilization for a minimum of 6 weeks. Thomas scoffed before the coach even opened it. The coach flipped through the report with one hand, barely scanning the highlighted sections. This, he said, tapping a finger against the X-ray, this is what we're stopping a team for. You don't get to be match fit by running to the nurse for every bump. It's not a bump, Vance said, still even. It's a break, confirmed by imaging. Thomas stepped forward now, voice tightening. Children get knocked. That's the game. If we pulled every lad with a bruise, we'd never field a team. Then maybe the training needs revision, Vance replied quietly. The coach's voice sharpened. He needs to play. It's not even a full fracture, just minor compression. These doctors panic. A little pain never killed anyone. You're not a doctor, Vance replied, unblinking. And the person who is a doctor put that cast on for a reason. He's playing tomorrow, Thomas cut in. This match has sponsors, legacy implications. Do you understand what's at stake? If he sits out over something small, it'll be in the papers. Vance tilted his head slightly. So will a worsened fracture. So will permanent joint damage. And so, perhaps, will this conversation. For the first time, the coach looked uneasy. Thomas, however, was still riding high on entitlement. You're a guard, he said flatly. You don't get to determine match eligibility. I'll have William briefed. You should, Vance said. Before either of them could speak again, another voice cut across the grass. Am I still supposed to go? George. He was standing quietly at the edge of the field, his newly casted arm held against his body with a fabric sling. The nurse had wrapped it carefully, but it still looked awkward on his small frame. The coach turned toward him. "Of course you are, we'll work around it. It's just discomfort, that's all." George didn't move, and he looked to the guard instead, and then said softly, "I don't want to play if it hurts more." Silence. The wind rustled a discarded bib on the ground. Somewhere in the distance, a flag rattled faintly against its pole. Thomas broke it with a scoff. "You're being dramatic, George. This is just fear talking. Don't let it win." George's eyes dropped, but the guard didn't speak to Thomas. He crouched down slightly, bringing himself level with the boy. "You don't have to play if something's wrong," Vance said, calm and quiet. "Pain isn't weakness, and saying something isn't failure." George nodded once. The coach snapped, "This is what happens when the guard oversteps. He's softening the boy's resolve." Vance stood up again, folder still in hand. "No, I'm reinforcing what leadership actually looks like." He held the folder toward Thomas once more. "Your choice is whether you want to be on the right side of this when others read what's inside." Thomas didn't take it, didn't say a word, but his jaw clenched, and the guard walked away. He didn't need their permission anymore. Vance didn't wait for an opening. He didn't go through assistants, didn't request an appointment, didn't stand in line behind diplomatic folders and state portfolios. He walked straight into the East Wing's restricted corridor, where only senior aides and security officers moved with that kind of intent. And when the steward at the double doors blocked his path, Vance simply held up the folder and said, "It concerns the prince's son. It's urgent." The steward's eyes flicked to the uniform, then to the sealed folder. But something in the guard's voice, too steady to be dramatic, made the man step aside without another word. Inside, the room was quiet but active. Prince William stood at the head of a narrow conference table, sleeves rolled, collar loosened slightly, reading aloud a report on foreign investment negotiations. Around him, advisers scribbled notes, and one aide hovered with a tablet. There were names being mentioned, ambassadors, trade routes, timetables. Vance waited at the doorway until William's gaze lifted and found him. It took less than a second. William didn't pause. He didn't acknowledge him with a wave or nod. He simply turned to the table and said, "We'll pick this up tomorrow." The entire room stilled. A few eyes darted toward Vance. "Now," William said again, calm but with finality. The room emptied in under 15 seconds. When the doors clicked shut, William turned fully toward the guard, brow low. "Is it George?" Vance stepped forward and offered the folder without a word. William took it, opened it, and began reading. First the top page, typed notes in clinical language. Then the image, a clear, stark fracture line just below the elbow. He didn't speak, just flipped slowly to the next page. A diagram of healing stages, then a record of vital signs, then physician notes detailing pain response. Only after reading the final paragraph, marked with a red underline and the word urgent in the header, did William look up. His voice was flat. "This happened today?" "Yes, sir. Initial contact during a drill, aggravated during practice." "Who saw it?" "Everyone." The coach dismissed it. Thomas Parker Bowles was also present. They both insisted George was fine and that he'd be playing tomorrow. William's jaw twitched slightly. Vance continued, still calm. "George approached me during water break. Said it hurt. Asked if it was normal. I observed swelling and limitation of movement. You took him straight to the med wing. After the practice ended, I informed them first. They refused assessment." William's face shifted again, this time subtly. He closed the folder. "Did Thomas say why?" "He said match optics mattered, that George needed to play. The coach said boys get hurt, and that pain is part of sport." William walked to the far side of the room and activated the central screen. He typed something. Then the monitor lit up with training footage. "Security cams on field 3, he said quietly. He fast-forwarded past stretches of normal drills until he paused, frame by frame, on the moment George was tackled from the side, landing on his arm. There was no scream, no drama, just the boy curling around his elbow and trying to get up without using the arm. Then the coach yelling something off camera, George forcing himself upright. William watched it 3 times. each time slower. Then he let the footage run until it showed Thomas stepping onto the field and slapping the back of another boy, saying something inaudible but sharp. George stands nearby, holding his elbow stiffly at his side. William exhaled slowly. He shut the monitor off. His voice, when it came, was calm, controlled, and yet somehow louder than anything else. Where are they now? Vance didn't have to ask who he meant. They're still near the southern field. The coach was making calls. Thomas was watching. William didn't wait. He walked past the guard and down the corridor, and for the first time that day the palace shifted, not because someone shouted, not because the rules were broken, but because a father had just read an X-ray. And the silence that followed him down the corridor was not silence at all. The southern field hadn't changed much since the guard left. The sky had dimmed slightly, shadows lengthening over the pitch. But the coach was still there, pacing with short, angry strides near a stack of folded cones. Thomas stood with one hand in his coat pocket, scrolling slowly through his phone, the other arm hooked lazily behind his back. Neither of them noticed William until he spoke. "May don't turn." The voice struck like a cold blade, quiet but so unmistakable in command that both men froze mid-motion. Thomas's head snapped up first. William stepped between them slowly, not stopping until he stood just a few feet away, enough for the air to feel thinner between them. "I'm going to speak once," William said. "You will both listen." Neither man replied. William held the sealed folder in his hand, but didn't offer it yet. "My son has a confirmed fracture. He sustained it under your watch, and rather than respond with caution, you dismissed it, mocked it, pressured him to ignore it." Thomas opened his mouth, but William raised one finger without even looking at him. "Not yet." He turned to the coach first. "I've reviewed the footage. I saw how you forced him back into line. How you barked at him from the sidelines while he held his arm against his side like he was hiding a wound in plain sight." The coach licked his lips, searching for a response. William continued. "George did not fall in a game. He was injured in practice. He came to you. You dismissed him. A doctor confirmed that playing could have worsened the fracture permanently." "Respectfully, sir," the coach began, "in high-performance settings, boys take hits all the time. It's part of the sport. He's 8 years old." William's voice did not rise, but the weight behind the words was unmistakable. "He is not a soldier. He is not a pawn. He is a child." The coach looked down. William turned now to Thomas. "And you?" Thomas met his gaze, defensive. "William, come on." But William didn't flinch. "You told a royal guard that public optics mattered more than medical opinion. You stood by a man who told my son to ignore his own body. And when a fracture was confirmed, you called it a minor inconvenience. Is that what you call accountability?" Thomas straightened, squaring his shoulders. "It's rugby, not piano recital. You toughen them up early or they get eaten later. I thought you understood that." "No," William said. "You thought I'd stay silent, that I'd look the other way, because you're family, because boys will be boys, and bruises make headlines less than caution." He took a single step forward. "I will not be silent." He opened the folder, pulled out the X-ray, and held it up between them. "Tell me what this looks like to you." Thomas didn't speak. "Because to me," William said, "it looks like a line someone crossed, and never should have." He turned to the coach again. "Effective immediately, you are suspended. You are to leave this property under escort. Police will be in contact regarding formal charges. There is a pattern to your conduct, and we're done hiding it." The coach's face drained of colour. William turned to Thomas last. "You are no longer involved in any youth activity under this household. Not sports, not staff decisions, nothing." "You can't," Thomas began, but his voice faltered. "I just did." William's voice dropped lower now, so low that the field felt like it leaned in to hear. "You endangered a child, mine, for a game." Thomas looked away, and William's tone shifted once more, from authority to clarity. "You think this is about rugby? It never was. This is about trust." He turned to Vance, who had silently arrived just behind him. "Escort them both. Have the palace office alert the authorities." Vance nodded once. The coach sputtered. "This is madness. There are rules. You can't—" "There are rules," William said sharply. "You broke them." And then he walked away. No further words, no raised voice, just the silence that followed someone who'd done the one thing no one expected, acted, not for politics, not for power, but because a child didn't deserve pain disguised as discipline. The arrest wasn't loud. It didn't come with handcuffs in the mud or sirens blaring across the grounds. It came with clipped radios, 2 plainclothes officers, and a quiet car waiting just beyond the inner gates. When the coach saw the officers approaching, he tried to muster something between defiance and confusion. "This is absurd. I've trained harder boys for years. This is political." The taller of the 2 officers didn't respond. He simply held up a folded document. "Your name has been formally listed in 2 prior complaints regarding excessive pressure and unsafe drills in youth settings. Both cases closed due to lack of cooperation from supervising sponsors. Today's incident has reopened the inquiry." The coach's expression shifted, first anger, then calculation. But when the second officer added, "This time we have medical evidence, security footage, and a direct order from Palace Oversight," there was nothing left to spin. He was asked to step aside and then to step into the car. No restraints, but no question what was happening. Vance stood nearby as protocol dictated, silent, watchful, present not as a soldier, but as a witness, one the officers made note of, formally before departing. Thomas wasn't taken in, not that day, but his name was entered into the record under contributory negligence, for obstruction, for interfering with medical treatment, and for issuing verbal orders to override institutional safety. The legal phrasing was sterile, but the consequence wasn't. Thomas's access pass was revoked by sundown, his name removed from the Youth Sports Advisory Committee. He sent 3 messages to William's private office that evening. None were answered. And when he tried to show up the next morning to explain himself, speak to George, perhaps clarify, it was the guard who met him at the gate and said firmly, "His Highness is not receiving visitors, and Prince George is recovering under medical supervision." The message was clear. This wasn't about grudges. It was about structure, about boundaries that had been crossed, and systems that were no longer looking the other way. Back in the palace medical wing, George sat in a quiet examination room while a gentle-faced nurse fit a lightweight composite cast around his forearm. The boy didn't say much, but when the doctor asked, "How's the pain today?" he replied simply, "Better. It doesn't feel like someone's ignoring it anymore." His father sat beside him, jacket off, sleeves rolled, signing forms slowly, with focus. Outside the room, Vance stood guard, not because there was danger, but because that's what he was trained to do. Protect the ones who couldn't speak loudly enough to be heard, until someone decided to listen. The cast was white, simple, light, but unmistakable on George's small arm. He wore it like a quiet badge, without complaint, without bravado. Just a boy recovering from something that should have been seen sooner. He didn't return to the field that week, nor the week after. The match was cancelled. No announcements, no public explanations. But parents noticed the change in staff, noted the new coach's name, saw that Thomas no longer stood on the sidelines with his hands behind his back. Within the palace, it was handled cleanly. The palace secretary released a discreet internal memo. Increased oversight and reporting protocols are being implemented across all youth-facing engagements. No further comment. But those who knew, really knew, felt the shift. George returned to classes wearing his cast proudly. When another student asked what happened, he simply said, "It hurt and someone listened." The guard didn't expect anything. He hadn't done it for recognition. Hadn't taken George to the medical wing to be remembered. He had done it because something looked wrong. And once you see it, you act. But on a quiet Thursday afternoon he was summoned. Private chamber, no ceremony. He was met by Prince William, standing alone in the corner of a high-ceilinged room lined with books and the smell of old leather and polished wood. William didn't waste time. "I read your full report, twice." The guard nodded silent. William held the report in his hand, not as a prop, but as proof. You had every reason to step back. Authority told you not to intervene. Protocol said stay in your lane. And still, you chose the boy. He looked up. "That matters." The guard's voice came slow. I didn't know how serious it was. No, William replied, but you knew enough. You saw pain, and you refused to call it resilience. There was a pause. Then William extended his hand, firm, grateful. Thank you, Corporal. The handshake was brief, but as the guard turned to leave, a soft voice echoed from behind the door. He paused. George stepped in, his cast now wrapped in protective cloth, face open but hesitant. The boy looked up at him. My dad said you stopped it from getting worse. The guard crouched slightly, careful not to impose. George held out something small, a folded piece of paper, a sketch. It was crude, childish, but detailed in its own way. It showed a figure in red, standing between two larger shadows, with a smaller figure just behind. Underneath, written in uneven block letters, "Thank you for seeing me." The guard smiled but said nothing, just nodded, and tucked the drawing carefully into his jacket pocket, like something sacred. Because sometimes the only reward that matters is being told you made the right call before anyone else did. If someone had shown you that X-ray, would you have let George play anyway? Did the guard overstep by going against orders? Or was he the only one who actually did his job? And how far should discipline go before it becomes danger? Drop your answers in the comments. We read everyone. If this story held your attention, do us a favour. Tap the like button. It helps more than you know. Subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon so you don't miss the next guard who steps forward. And if you think someone else needs to hear this, share the video. Send it to a friend who cares about doing the right thing. 2 more stories are already on screen now. Pick one to watch next, and we'll see you tomorrow, same time.